Exeter is a cathedral city in Devon, England with a population of 124,328. It lies within the ceremonial county of Devon, of which it is the county town as well as the home of Devon County Council. Currently, the administrative area has the status of a non-metropolitan district and is therefore under the administration of the county council. The city is on the River Exe, about 37 miles northeast of Plymouth and 70 miles southwest of Bristol. Exeter was the most southwesterly Roman fortified settlement in Britain. Although there is evidence a Cornish tribe existed in Exeter before the Roman invasion, Exeter became a religious centre during the Middle Ages and into the Tudor times. Exeter Cathedral, founded in the mid-11th century, became Anglican during the 16th century English Reformation. During the late 19th century, Exeter became an affluent centre for the wool trade, although by the First World War the city was in decline. After the Second World War, much of the city centre was rebuilt and is now considered to be a centre for modern business and tourism in Devon and Cornwall. Name: the modern name of Exeter is a development of the Old English êksᵻtər, from the anglicised form of the river now known as the Exe, and the Old English suffix êksᵻtər, used to mark important fortresses or fortified towns. The Exe is a separate development of the Brittonic name of meaning water, or, more exactly, full of fish, that also appears in the English âksᵻtər, the Welsh usk, and Scottish whisky. History. Prehistory. Exeter began as settlements on a dry ridge ending in a spur overlooking a navigable river teeming with fish, with fertile land nearby. Although there have been no major prehistoric finds, these advantages suggest the site was occupied early. Such early towns had been a feature of pre-Roman Gaul as described by Julius Caesar in his commentaries, and it is possible that they existed in Britannia as well. Roman times. The Romans established a 42-acre, playing card-shaped fort named Isca around AD 55. The fort was the southwest terminus of the Fosseway and served as the base of the 5,000-man Second Augustan Legion originally led by Vespasian, later Roman Emperor, for the next 20 years before they moved to Caerleon in Wales, which was also known as Isca. To distinguish the two, the Romans also referred to Exeter as Isca Dumnoniorum, water town of the Devonians, and Caerleon as Isca Augusta. A small fort was also maintained at Topsham. A supply depot on the route between the two was excavated at St. Loys on Topsham Road in 2010. This settlement served as the tribal capital of the Devonians and was listed as one of their 4 cities by Ptolemy in his geography when the fortress was abandoned around the year 75. Its grounds were converted to civilian purposes. Its very large bathhouse was demolished to make way for a forum and basilica on a smaller scale. Bath was erected to the southeast. This area was excavated in the 1970s, but could not be maintained for public view owing to its proximity to the present-day cathedral. In January 2015, it was announced that Exeter Cathedral had launched a bid to restore the baths and open an underground centre for visitors. In the late 2nd century, the ditch and rampart defences around the old fortress were replaced by a bank and wall enclosing a much larger area, some 92 acres. Although most of the visible structure is older, the course of the Roman wall was used for Exeter's subsequent city walls, meaning about 70% of it remains and most of its route can be traced on foot. The Devonian Isca seems to have been most prosperous in the first half of the 4th century. More than 1,000 Roman coins have been found around the city, and there is evidence for copper and bronze working, a stockyard, and markets for the livestock, crops, and pottery produced in the surrounding countryside. The dating of the coins so far discovered, however, suggests a rapid decline. Virtually none have been discovered dating after the year 380. Medieval times. Bishop Ussher identified the êksᵻtər coin listed among the 28 cities of Britain by the History of the Britons as Isca. although David Nashford read it as a reference to pencilwood and thought it more likely to be Lindinus. Nothing is certainly known of Exeter from the time of the Roman withdrawal from Britain around the year 410 until around 680, when a document about St. Boniface reports that he was educated at an abbey in Exeter. By that time, the city was held by the Saxons, who had arrived in Exeter after defeating the British Dumnonians at Peernham in Somerset in 658. It seems likely that the Saxons maintained a quarter of the city for the Britons under their own laws around present-day Bartholomew Street, which was known as Bretagne Street until 1637 in memory of its former occupants. Exeter was known to the Saxons as æksᵻtər. In 876, it was attacked and briefly captured by Danish Vikings. Alfred the Great drove them out the next summer. Over the next few years, he elevated Exeter to one of the four burghs in Devon, rebuilding its walls on the Roman lines. These permitted the city to fend off another attack and siege by the Danes in 893. King Aethelstan again strengthened the walls around 928 and, at the same time, drove out the remaining Britons from the city. According to William of Malmesbury, they were sent beyond the river Tamar, which was fixed as the boundary of Devon. Other references suggest that the British simply moved to what is now the St. David's area, not far outside Exeter's walls. The quarter vacated by the Britons was apparently adapted as the Earl's Burgh, and was still named Earlsbury in the 12th century. In 1001, the Danes again failed to get into the city, but they were able to plunder it in 1003 because they were let in, for unknown reasons, by the French reeve of Emma of Normandy, who had been given the city as part of her dowry on her marriage to Ethelred the Unready the previous year. 2 years after the Norman conquest of England, Exeter rebelled against King William. Gaitha Thorkelsdottir, the mother of the slain King Harold, was living in the city at the time, and William promptly marched west and initiated a siege. After 18 days, William accepted the city's honorable surrender, swearing an oath not to harm the city or increase its ancient tribute. However, William quickly arranged for the building of Rougemont Castle to strengthen Norman control over the area. Properties owned by Saxon landlords were transferred into Norman hands, and, on the death of Bishop Leofric in 1072, the Norman Osbern Fitz-Osbern was appointed his successor. In 1136, early in the anarchy, Rougemont Castle was held against King Stephen by Baldwin de Redvers. Redvers submitted only after a 3-month siege, not when the 3 wells in the castle ran dry, but only after the exhaustion of the large supplies of wine that the garrison was using for drinking, baking, cooking, and putting out fires set by the besiegers. During the siege, King Stephen built an earthen fortification at the site now known as Danes Castle. The city held a weekly market for the benefit of its citizens from at least 1213, and by 1281 Exeter was the only town in the southwest to have 3 market days per week. There are also records of 7 annual fairs, the earliest of which dates from 1130, and all of which continued until at least the early 16th century. During the High Medieval period, both the cathedral clergy and the citizens enjoyed access to sophisticated aqueduct systems which brought pure drinking water into the city from springs in the neighbouring parish of St. Sidwell's. For part of their length, these aqueducts were conveyed through a remarkable network of subterranean tunnels, or underground passages, which survive largely intact and which may still be visited today. Modern times Tudor and Stuart eras. In 1537, the city was made a county corporate. In 1549, the city successfully withstood a month-long siege by the so-called Prayer Book rebels, Devon and Cornish folk who had been infuriated by the radical religious policies of King Edward VI. The insurgents occupied the suburbs of Exeter, burnt down 2 of the city gates and attempted to undermine the city walls, but were eventually forced to abandon the siege after they had been worsted in a series of bloody battles with the king's army. A number of rebels were executed in the immediate aftermath of the siege. The liveried old almshouses and chapel at Heavytree were founded in March 1591 and finished in 1594. The city's motto, Semper Fidelis, is traditionally held to have been suggested by Elizabeth I, in acknowledgement of the city's contribution of ships to help defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588. However, its first documented use is in 1660. Schools in Exeter teach that the motto was bestowed by Charles II in 1660 at the Restoration due to Exeter's role in the English Civil War, when in 1638 Reverend John Wheelwright was exiled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and subsequently established a community on the banks of the Squamscott River. He named the region Exeter after its Devonian counterpart. During the American Revolution it became the capital of New Hampshire. Exeter was secured for Parliament at the beginning of the English Civil War, and its defences very much strengthened. But in September 1643 it was captured by the Cornish Royalist army led by Prince Maurice. Thereafter, the city remained firmly under the king's control until near the end of the war, being one of the final Royalist cities to fall into parliamentarian hands. The surrender of Exeter was negotiated in April 1646 at Poltymore House by Thomas Fairfax. During this period, Exeter was an economically powerful city, with a strong trade of wool. This was partly due to the surrounding area, which was more fertile and better inhabited than that passed over the preceding day, according to Count Lorenzo Magalotti, who visited the city when he was 26 years old. Magalotti writes of over 30,000 people being employed in the county of Devon as part of the wool and cloth industries. Merchandise that was sold to the West Indies, Spain, France and Italy. Celia Fiennes also visited Exeter during this period, in the early 1700s. She remarked on the vast trade and incredible quantity in Exeter, recording that it turns the most money in a week of anything in England, between £10,000 and £15,000. Georgian and Victorian eras. Early in the Industrial Revolution, Exeter's industry developed on the basis of locally available agricultural products and, since the city's location on a fast-flowing river gave it ready access to water power, an early industrial site developed on drained marshland to the west of the city, at ʻɛksᵻtər. However, when steam power replaced water in the 19th century, Exeter was too far from sources of coal to develop further. As a result, the city declined in relative importance, and was spared the rapid 19th century development that changed many historic European cities. Extensive canal redevelopments during this period further expanded Exeter's economy, with vessels of 15 to 16 tons burthen, bringing up goods and merchandise from Topsham to the city quay. In 1778 a new bridge across the Exe was opened to replace the old medieval bridge. Built at a cost of £30,000, it had 3 arches and was built of stone. In 1832, cholera, which had been erupting all across Europe, reached Exeter. The only known documentation of this event was written by Dr. Thomas Shapter, one of the medical doctors present during the epidemic. The first railway to arrive in Exeter was the Bristol and Exeter Railway that opened a station at St David's on the western edge in 1844. The South Devon Railway Company extended the line westwards to Plymouth, opening their own smaller station at St Thomas, above Cowick Street. A more central railway station, that at Queen Street, was opened by the London and South Western Railway in 1860 when it opened its alternative route to London. Butchers Lloyd Maunder moved to their present base in 1915, to gain better access to the Great Western Railway for transportation of meat products to London. The first electricity in Exeter was provided by the Exeter Electric Light Company, which was formed at the end of the 1880s. But it was municipalized in 1896 and became the City of Exeter Electricity Company. The first horse-drawn trams in Exeter were introduced in 1882 with 3 lines radiating from the city's east gate. One line went to St. David's Station via New North Road, the Obelisk and St. David's Hill. The second line went out along Heavy Tree Road to Livery Hall, and the third went to Mount Pleasant along Sidwell Street. There was a depot off New North Road. 20th century. On the 29th of March 1905, a new bridge across the Exe was opened, replacing the former Georgian Bridge. Made of cast iron and steel with a 3-hinged arch design, it cost £25,000 and was designed by Sir John Wolfe Barry. Also in 1905, electric trams replaced the horse trams with a new route which passed along the High Street, down Fore Street and over the new Exe Bridge. Once over the Exe, the line divided, with one route along Alphington Road and another along Cowick Street. The line to St. David's Station travelled along Queen Street instead of along New North Road, and the line to Heavy Tree was extended. On the 17th of March 1917, a tram went out of control going down Fore Street, hit a horse-drawn wagon, then overturned on Exe Bridge, and one female passenger was killed. By the 1920s, there were problems with congestion caused by the trams, a need for expensive track renewal work, and the slow speed of the trams in Exeter's narrow streets. After much discussion, the council decided to replace the tram service with double-decker buses, and the last tram ran on the 19th of August 1931. The only remaining Exeter tram in service is Car 19, now at the Seaton Tramway. Exeter was bombed by the German Luftwaffe in the Second World War, when a total of 18 raids between 1940 and 1942 flattened much of the city centre. In 1942, as part of the Baedeker Blitz and specifically in response to the RAF bombing of Lübeck and Rostock, 40 acres of the city, particularly adjacent to its central High Street and Sidwell Street, were leveled by incendiary bombing. Many historic buildings in the heart of the city were destroyed, and others, including the cathedral, were damaged. Large areas of the city centre were rebuilt in the 1950s, when little attempt was made to preserve Exeter's ancient heritage. Damaged buildings were generally demolished rather than restored, and even the street plan was altered in an attempt to improve traffic circulation. The post-war buildings are generally perceived as being of little architectural merit, unlike many of those that they replaced, such as Bedford Circus, Southern Hay, and a section of the ancient city wall. On the 27th of October 1960, following very heavy rain, the Exe overflowed and flooded large areas of Exeter, including Exwick, St. Thomas, and Alphington. The water rose as high as 2 meters above ground level in places, and 150 employees of the local firm Beach Brothers were trapped for 9 hours. 2,500 properties were flooded. Later the same year, on the 3rd of December, the river levels rose again, flooding 1,200 properties. These floods led to the construction of new flood defences for Exeter. Work began in 1965, took 12 years to complete and cost £8 million. The defences included 3 flood relief channels, and were complemented by the construction of 2 new concrete bridges to replace the old Exe Bridge, which had obstructed the flow of the river and made the flooding worse. 21st century. The Princess shopping centre adjoining the Cathedral Close and the High Street was redeveloped between 2005 and 2007. Despite some local opposition, it incorporates 123 varied residential units to enable people with limited mobility to enjoy the city. Exeter Community Transport Association provides manual and powered wheelchairs and scooters for use by anyone suffering from short or long-term mobility impairment to access to the city centre and shopping facilities, events and meetings with friends and company. In May 2008, there was an attempted terrorist attack on the Giraffe Café in Princess, but the bomber was the only one injured. A £30 million improvement scheme for the flood defences was approved in March 2015. The plans involved the removal of check weirs on a deeper, meandering stream in the centre of the drainage channels to improve flow. The plans followed a study by the Environment Agency that revealed weaknesses in the current defences.